Wind hisses through the bocage as an 88mm barks from a hedgerow lane. Then a bright scream of steel, a shower of sparks, and a gouged but unpunctured glacis plate lurches onward. Another hit glances wide. The American tank noses through the gap. It stinks of damp earth and cordite. Tracks chew roots. The radio net clicks like insects in summer grass. This is 1944 Normandy, and the thesis is simple. Slope, angle, and method turn supposedly inferior Shermans into survivors when distance and tactics are right. The Wehrmacht's early contempt grows from 1942 to 43 battles where flat plates, exposed silhouettes, and poor angling habits meet appliqué 40s, Panthers, and Tigers and lose. But by mid-1944 the equation changes. Late-model M4s arrive with 47-degree glacis plates. Wet ammunition stowage reduces catastrophic fires. Fieldcraft forces oblique impacts. Crews learn to live inside the geometry. Hull down, turret forward, subtle pivots that thicken armor by presenting a slant rather than a square. The contempt that feeds German confidence has a pedigree. In 1942-43, the M4 arrives with flat plates and generous silhouettes. Crews expose hulls square to threat lines, and the appliqué, the Panther, and the Tiger answer with clean, normal angle penetrations. Range and thickness dominate. Penetrations cook ammunition stored along the sponsons. Flames take oxygen in men. The nickname spreads faster than corrections. Ronson lights every time. The story becomes myth, and myth becomes doctrine. American armor is a soft problem for hard guns. By mid-1944, the numbers begin to change. Late production large-hatch Shermans carry a 47-degree glacis that forces a projectile to bite a longer path through steel. Wet ammunition stowage wraps propellant in fluid jackets that smother post-penetration fires. Crews drill habits that matter more than millimeters. Hull down behind hedgerow banks. Turret forward but never rigid. Small steering inputs that show the enemy a wedge instead of a wall. Tiny choices stack up. Obliquity steals energy. Ricochet returns as a possibility in ranges where certainty once ruled. A new figure rolls into the column. The M4A3E2 Jumbo. Assault armor piles on the nose. Turret cheeks grow heavy around the mantlet. Mass soaks the first hit so the second can be answered. No one claims invulnerability. The 8.8 centimeter gun, KWK-36 from Tigers, appliqué-43 from long-barreled towed pieces, remains lethal at short range and with a clean angle. The question changes instead. Not whether the 88 can kill, but how often, at what distance, and under whose terms the first clean shot is denied. Meanwhile, radios move the geometry. Every Sherman carries the SCR-508, Signal Corps radio, as standard kit. Platoon leaders speak a dialect of brevity codes and bearings. Sections shift 5 meters left, 3 meters forward, and the presentation to the gunner across the field transforms. One tank holds hull down, another slides to create a crossfire, a third posts to kill the flanking gun that opens after the first muzzle flash. Coordination teaches the enemy's projectile to arrive at bad angles. Normandy's hedgerows punish the careless and reward the methodical. Engineers weld rhino tusks to cut living banks. Drivers stop short of the slit, cant the hull 10 or 15 degrees, and wait for infantry to feel out wires and powder dust. Artillery lays smoke to make range estimation uncertain. When a tank noses through at last, only the turret shows, already turned to address the most likely threat. The first German round comes hot. Sometimes it bites. Often it skates in a spray of lime green sparks and splinters of bark. Learning is uneven and cost is paid. A platoon that forgets to angle leaves a square target and takes a straight line hit. A gunner who lingers too long for a perfect sight picture gets outranged by higher velocity. But the curve bends. Maintenance logs begin to distinguish between total losses and mobility kills brought home by the wrecker. Fewer burnt hulls sit cold in the lanes. Photographs show Shermans with gouges and scars instead of blackened wreckage. The sensory map is distinct. Engines idle at a base murmur, then surge as drivers feather clutches to pivot a few degrees. The net pops and hisses. A commander counts off a short bound. Powder smoke drags a chemical sweetness across hedges. A ricochet winds into apple trees. The shell that should have gone through does not. A loader exhales. A hand touches the still hot groove across the glacis and comes away black. Tactically, the advance becomes a choreography of small survivals. Hold down to spot. Pivot to steepen the angle. Fire. Then move. Repeat. The platoon fights as moving planes rather than isolated machines. When one tank takes the lead, often a jumbo, the section reshapes behind it. Guns at the edge of the map must choose between targets that never quite present full faces. The opposition learns caution because certainty has left the field. The day's light thins. Birds return to hedges after shock. The tank that caught the glancing blow is still mobile, still dangerous. Tracks grind forward again, this time toward broader sightlines and longer decisions. The lesson moves with the column. Trust slope, trust the cant, trust the net. Cities and open country wait ahead, and the same ideas will have to work there, under a different sky and at higher speeds. To understand where this transformation began, we need to step back to 1943, where German contempt for American armor was first born. On the battlefields of 1943, in Tunisia and Italy, the weaknesses of the early Sherman were laid bare, and the geometry that would later save lives was still taking shape. In 1943, the German officer corps has reasons to sneer. Tunisia teaches hard lessons. Flat-on approaches, square hulls, and generous silhouettes turn the M4 into a straightforward trigonometry problem for a 7.5 cm appliqué 40. In Italy's long valleys, the Panther's 7.5 cm KWK 42 and the Tiger's 8.8 cm KWK 36 punish frontal exposures at ranges where American gunners struggle to repay the favor. The sobriquet spreads Ronson, lights every time, because early ammunition racks along the sponsons suffer when armor is perforated and propellant cooks. Derision becomes comfortable. Doctrine calcifies around it. Yet even as derision hardens into dogma, a different American logic is taking shape. Design doctrine prizes reliability, crew ergonomics, and radios in every turret. The SCR 508 Signal Corps radio is standard, not a luxury. That choice changes the fight from lone duelists to coordinated teams. Tanks arrive not as solitary problems but as elements in a timed geometry. One holds hull down, one maneuvers to steepen obliquity, one stands off for overwatch. The map begins to look like a set of moving wedges, not squares waiting to be struck. Late 1943 drawings turn that logic into steel. The so-called large hatch hull appears, the frontal plate recut to about 47 degrees, the drivers and assistants openings enlarged, the internal layout revised to make ammunition less vulnerable. The shift is iterative, not revolutionary, and thus easy to underestimate, yet the compounding effect is real. A round that would have traversed a flat plate at a given distance now bites longer metal. A hit that would have ignited dry stowage now meets wet sleeves around propellant, and the flame dies instead of lives. Meanwhile, frontline improvisation attacks weak zones directly. Crews weld spare track links to the glacis and turret front, add appliqué where casting thins near the driver's side, and roughen paint to break shine. These add-ons are marginal armor but significant discipline. They remind crews to cant, to move, to treat every open stretch as a firing solution in search of a target. Angling stops being a trick and becomes a habit you can see in photographs. Tanks parked with noses slightly offline even at rest. German range advantages persist. Charts remain honest. A KWK-42 makes a poor candidate for frontal generosity. But range only matters if the impact is normal. The Americans learned to deny the perpendicular. They use terrain like a tool. Reverse slopes in Italy, hedge banks in Normandy, stone walls in Brittany, to shrink and slant the presented surface. Smoke shells are budgeted like life insurance. A platoon that can blind an unseen gun for 60 seconds can also slide 5 meters and change the outcome of the next shot. By spring 1944, the hedgerows await, and with them a new proving ground. Line of sight collapses. Sound replaces long-range vision. A platoon listens for the brittle crack of a appliqué-40, the deeper slap of an 88. The clatter of tracks that does not match friendly cadence. Every 50 meters becomes decisive. The unit that keeps its hulls canted, keeps its turrets queuing to likely arcs, and keeps its net quiet but constant, finds itself alive at the end of lanes where earlier companies died. Training distills into a few imperatives. Never give a perpendicular, never halt square, never hoard smoke. The emotional current runs beneath the diagrams. Crews who saw friends lost in Italy and Tunisia bring that memory to Normandy. They no longer believe in miracles or wonder weapons. They believe in steps, the exact sequence that stacks odds in their favor. Angle, short halt, fire, move. Angle, smoke, move. The rhythm deromanticizes the duel and replaces it with process. This is not about transcendence. It is about survivability compounding into tempo. By the time the first columns break out from the beachheads, contempt has begun to fray. German gun crews still expect the square target, still trust range tables populated by perpendicular assumptions. They get instead a wedge that will not sit still, a platoon whose first shot is often the enemy's second problem. The terrain conspires with the learners. The campaign will move into open field soon enough, but the habits formed here will matter more there, because angles chosen at 800, 1,000 meters will decide breathing in the first minute. Those lessons soon hardened into metal. The story now moved from experience to equation, from thickness to angle and obliquity. Inside the steel, protection was never a simple number. It was trigonometry in motion, practiced through instinct rather than mathematics. Armor thickness is not a number. It is a trigonometry problem that behaves differently under stress and speed. A plate listed as 5163.5 mm on paper is not the same plate when it is cut at 47 degrees and presented at a further 10-15 degrees of hull cant. The projectile, whether from a appliqué 40, a cut 42, or an 8.8 cm Pec 43, must travel a longer line through steel. Risks yaw at high obliquity and may deflect outright if the nose fails to bite. Crews do not recite the formulas. They perform them by instinct, turning lessons into hand motion and throttle pressure. The U.S. Army's wartime engineering rewires where risk lives. Wet stowage moves cartridges from vulnerable sponsons into armored racks surrounded by water glycol sleeves. When penetrations occur, propellant ignition becomes less likely. Crews get seconds they did not have in 1943. Those seconds mean a smoke grenade actually thrown, a reverse gear actually engaged, a radio call actually made. Survivability grows not because steel becomes mythical, but because time is purchased at the moment it matters most. Then the M4A3E2 Jumbo arrives, an assault variant purpose-built for first contact. The hull front thickens toward 102 mm. The turret face and mantlet accumulate mass well past that in critical arcs, and the silhouette squats lower in menace. It leads columns where leading is a sentence. It exists to take the opening blow and still be there when the second shot matters. Against a clean short-range 88 hit, even the Jumbo has no guarantee. Against slanted strikes at midfield, and at the many distances where velocity decays, it steals back probability. Even non-Jumbos benefit when commanders insist on hull-down positions, gentle terrain crests, and defilade approaches. A few feet of dirt is the cheapest armor ever made. A hedgerow bank that hides a hull turns a Sherman into a turret and a gun, smaller, harder, sloped by default. The wall the gunner expected resolves into a wedge, and the wedge moves before the second sight picture is found. The tactical aim is not invulnerability. It is denial. Deny the gunner a normal impact. Deny the crew a second shot at the same presentation. Deny the range table the assumptions it requires. Once the first enemy round fails to achieve what the doctrine promised, tempo flips. The American platoon floods flanks. The Overwatch gun, quiet for long minutes, finds the side of a vehicle designed to be deadly only from the front and becomes decisive at 600, 800 meters. Radios bind the denial into a system. The SCR 508 net allows a platoon to choreograph shifts in seconds. A leader asks for a 5-meter slide. 2 hulls comply. A third calls smoke. Crossfires manifest as geometry, not slogans. German guns still outrange American 75mm pieces on paper, but the side plate of a Panther at the same distance is a different problem entirely. The 76mm gun extends reach. Schwap, when available, bites deeper. What seemed a straight line on a table becomes a set of planes in a field, and the planes move. There is also the question of the hit after the hit. Mobility kills increase. Tow cables matter. ARVs and wreckers return damaged hulls that would once have burned to regiment lines for repair. The ratio of repaired tanks to write-offs climbs as fire falls. A tank that does not burn teaches its crew longer. A platoon that keeps crews alive retains memory and spreads method. The system compounds because the people inside the steel survive to improve it. The math inside the steel thus resolves into something human. A loader who trusts the process moves faster. A driver who angles without thinking rescues his own life and the gunners in the same motion. A commander who plans a route through reverse slopes and dead ground gives the enemy fewer chances to apply a textbook. By late 1944, American armored units are less a collection of machines and more a discipline visible from the air in how they occupy ground. Tilted, dispersed, briefly halting, always poised to slide. The war will soon test that discipline in open country where fog can both hide and reveal, where range grows long enough to tempt a frontal trade, and where the enemy fields guns worthy of fear. The next field is Lorraine. The weather will decide visibility. The radios will decide tempo. The angles will decide who breathes when the first minute ends. And when the mists of Lorraine rose in September 1944, that new arithmetic of armor met its most brutal examination. Aricourt. At dawn near Aricourt in Lorraine, September 1944, the mist lifts, and Panthers loom where wheat had been. First shots crack wide because the Americans are already angled and talking. The 4th Armored Division meets 11th Panzer in rolling fields, where shallow ridgelines and stubble create sight lines measured in seconds. German guns and optics are formidable. Their assault lacks reconnaissance and drives into a web of American observers, tank destroyers and Sherman platoons tied together by radios. The Shermans cheat the math, hull down at shallow reverse slopes, then a half-track left to steepen the impact angle, never quite square, always moving. The Sherman is not a wonder weapon. Its 75mm struggles on paper against a Panther's frontal arc. The battlefield is not paper. At 600-800 meters, a Panther sight is a solvable problem. The American round arrives where armor thins and weld seams concentrate stress. Crews learn to bait with a hull-down presence that suggests a frontal duel, then rearrange in fog so that the next sight picture presents a flank. When German gunners fire into the initial silhouette, many rounds strike turrets or upper glacis at slants that rob penetration and buy seconds. Tank destroyers, M10s and M18s, thread the fight. Their doctrine is to kill tanks from ambush, not to lead in street corners, and Aricourt gives them what doctrine promised: openings. The net pulls them like chess pieces into temporary angles that complement a Sherman platoon's movement. American artillery, pre-registered on likely approaches, throws smoke as an offensive weapon, breaking range estimation and forcing German guns to shoot through shifting translucence. The speed of American micro-adjustments defeats the speed of German shells. German reports after the battle note a maddening phenomenon: enemy tanks that refuse to stop square for a direct shot, platoons that seem to slide rather than drive, and gunners who take short halts rather than commit to long exposure. The fog edits every plan. The radio repairs it. The Panther's strengths, frontal armor long 75, feel misapplied when targets will not obey the geometry the range table assumes. Meanwhile, American recovery teams pull damaged hulls from fields where in 1943 they would have burned. By week's end, the losses diverge. German formations bleed vehicles and crews at a rate that erodes offensive capacity. American units report modest tank casualties for the scale of the engagement and keep moving. The disparity is not myth. It is behavior made visible. Who keeps hulls oblique, who keeps nets coherent, who refuses to trade frontal plates for pride. The sensory memory of Aricourt is fog burned thin by mid-morning sun, diesel rumble underfoot, and the intermittent metallic shriek of a round that skates. Fields look ordinary from the road. From a gunner's sight, they are a set of planes and folds that either lengthen or shorten life. Crewmen later trace gouges across glacis plates with enamel-blackened fingers and know what a spared minute means. The lesson moves down mess line rumors and into written orders. Keep the cant. Short halts. Smoke before you think you need it. The phrases are not poetry. They are the muscle memory of units that discovered physics can be trained. Aricourt becomes a story told to new replacements in the tone of a recipe. Not every kitchen has fog or Panthers, but every kitchen has angles and radios. The principal scales Aricourt also becomes a caution. When weather clears and range opens too far, frontal trades punish the rash. When a unit forgets to move the wedge and offers a flat plate out of habit, the old arithmetic returns with all its cruelty. The battle thus teaches the precise boundaries of the method. Use it, and even a lighter tank lives long enough to kill well. Forget it, and paper numbers reassert themselves. By the time the fighting slides east, the name means more than a place. It is shorthand for geometry winning tempo. The campaign will ask next for these same habits inside streets with window fire, at stonewalled villages, and against guns the crews already fear. The first to feel the new method on urban corners will be jumbos with their thick faces, moving at walking pace and breathing for everyone behind them. What worked in Lorraine's open fields had been learned months earlier among the hedgerows of Normandy. To see where those instincts were born, we go back to the bocage. June-July 1944, Normandy. Here, every hedgerow became a classroom where angle, smoke, and discipline were taught in fire. Normandy's hedgerows are not walls. They are classrooms with living roofs and root-bound floors. Battalions like the 741st and 743rd Tank learn to carve lanes with welded rhino tusks. Then halt just short of a breach with hulls canted 10-15 degrees. Infantry slide forward along ditch lines and feel for wire, disturbed soil, and the chalk dust that marks a camouflaged gun. A German 88mm, whether a appliqué pressed into anti-tank duty or the long-barreled paquet 43, can still kill anything it hits cleanly at typical hedgerow ranges. So the Americans make clean rare. The combined arms rhythm settles into muscle. One section overwatches while another bounds. Artillery lays smoke not as decoration, but as a tool to change the angle of the next incoming round. Engineers push culverts and cut keys through earthen banks that let a tank surface turret only. Commanders accept that spare track welded to glacis and turret is not an amulet. It is a visual cue to cant. Crews use it like a carpenter's square. If the spare links look straight to the threat, they are wrong. The SCR 508 radio net becomes a metronome. On quiet lanes, you can hear it under the engines. Terse bearings, range calls, 2-word orders to pivot 3 meters. The net keeps the platoon's planes aligned so that a hidden gun must choose between bad shots, not invited ones. If a round arrives and bites, the call is smoke first, motion second. Wet stowage turns a potential funeral into a mobility kill more often than before. Wreckers take those hulls home and crews return to the line with new scars and better habits. Fear does not vanish. It becomes managed. The 88 retains a mythic sting that no training neutralizes. Crews respect its thunder and the flatline dangers of a short lane. But fear no longer arrests movement. It becomes one more variable in a drill that allocates seconds wisely. 2 to throw smoke, 2 to pivot, 1 to speak a bearing. In this small economy, survival is purchased one practiced action at a time. By Operation Cobra and the breakout near St. Lo, these habits become doctrine. Orders emphasize oblique approaches, hold-down pauses, and never halting square to a suspected gun. Platoons that master the rhythm move through hedgerow blocks faster and with fewer dead hulls. Formations that do not leave blackened reminders of the old ways at gaps and bends. The difference is visible from the air as thin white scars of smoke bent across lanes at angles not blown straight. Learning here feeds later fights elsewhere. The same choreography holds in Brittany's stone walls and in the approaches to Paris. Not a frontal charge at a line, but a series of angled entries that break the enemy's range tables before a single round is fired. The battalion's map grows marks where reverse slopes saved lives and where squared hulls cost them. Those marks become part of the institutional memory sent forward with replacements. Bocage tactics also recalibrate crew roles. The driver becomes a survival specialist whose steering inputs add armor. The commander becomes a choreographer of wedges. The gunner accepts that the best shot may be the next shot from a teammate after his first round, forces the enemy to resight. Even the loader's discipline matters. Maintaining ammunition order so that smoke, HE, and AP come to hand without confusion when seconds set outcomes. What hedgerows teach above all is that presentation is a weapon. Units that treat their silhouette as a tool live to prove it across open country. Units that treat armor thickness as destiny discover that destiny is a choice of angle offered to an enemy who wants a flat, easy problem. The move from Normandy into the wider campaign carries that lesson like a stencil on every glacis. Never give a perpendicular. The front widens, roads straighten, and fields open toward the Seine. The same voices continue on the net, a little steadier, a little faster. The next battles will lengthen range and invite frontal trades that feel tempting after cramped lanes. The discipline forged in green tunnels will need to hold in city canyons and on river approaches, where the first hit still decides if a second can be made. There, the jumbos will take their place at the head of the column and convert classroom theory into momentum. The habits forged in the countryside followed the army into the cities. And in Aachen, the jumbos would take the lead. A squat silhouette with thick cheeks noses into Aachen's shattered avenues. The M4A3E2 Jumbo. It is October 1944, and 1st Infantry Division with 3rd Armored Division fights block to block against pillboxes, rubble, and interlocking fields of fire. The jumbo leads because someone must. Its thickened glacis and massive mantlet exist to absorb what earlier models could not. In tight streets, a perfect presentation is hard to avoid. Corners make ambush geometry, and windows hold muzzle flashes like matches in a dark room. When streets widen, rail yards, boulevards, the old math returns in American favor. Distance grows, obliquity returns, and the first impact begins to fail more often. Urban fighting is an education in pace. Tanks advance at walking speed under a roof of debris, with infantry glued to their flanks and tank destroyers posted to lanes that might cough a Panther from behind a courtyard. The jumbo's job is to take the first punch and survive long enough to let the column decide. When hits come at 800 to 1,000 meters across long boulevards or rail yards, obliquity and armor often conspire to shatter, skip, or nose in without full penetration. At closer ranges, the jumbo buys seconds. Enough for smoke, for reverse gears, for a teammate to step out and cut the angle. Crews adopt a chant inside the steel. Angle, fire, call it. Angle move. It is not superstition. The driver feeds in tiny steering inputs, feathered adjustments that tilt the glacis just enough to steal a few degrees of the attacker's normal. The commander watches window lines and alley mouths. The gunner commits to short halts rather than long exposures. The loader prestages smoke and AP for the sequence he knows is coming. The radio net, SCR 508, carries clipped calls that keep the line lean and the crossfire tight. Not every ricochet is a miracle. Many are simply the physics of slope doing what it was designed to do. Post-penetration fires are less frequent now because wet stowage smothers ignition. And the crews that would have died in 1943 reverse out under smoke, swap positions with the next tank, and re-enter the block from a new angle. The rhythm saves lives and creates tempo. Tempo creates opportunity. An enemy gun that must relay after a glancing strike is an enemy exposed to a flanking round from the second or third tank in line. Aaken's blocks are only one chapter in a larger urban campaign. Hergen forests leading to the rower crossings force armor onto roads laced with mines and covered by anti-tank guns. Here too, jumbos act as breach openers and morale anchors. A column that sees the lead tank survive. A first hit moves with a confidence that multiplies across companies. The psychological economy matters. Crews trust that the first blow does not end the story. They behave differently because of it, closing distance where a year earlier they would have waited. Numbers do not tell every truth, but they trace behavior. Maintenance logs show increasing proportions of repairable damage versus write-offs in late 1944. Recovery vehicles work nights to pull mobility kills to collection points. Ammunition cook-off rates drop compared to early war data. These are not abstractions to crews. They are the reason a commander who would have paused at noon presses on at 3. Survivability becomes operational. It changes what a corps commander believes is possible before dusk. What urban fighting teaches about angle and armor returns to open country with the force of habit. When fields widen again, the same micro-steering that kept a tank alive on a corner keeps it alive on a ridge. The same smoke discipline that veiled a boulevard veils a meadow. The same insistence on crossfires ensures the next Panther does not get the frontal trade it trained to demand. The jumbo remains rare compared to standard M4s, but its example shapes tactics for all. Take the opening blow on purpose. Keep the can't, make the second round yours. By winter, the method is common language. Units speak in geometry without using the word. Drivers talk about showing cheek. Gunners discuss buying seconds with a short halt and a bad angle. Commanders planning river approaches specify reverse slopes as if listing ammunition. The city taught the lesson loudly. The army carries it forward in quiet, deliberate motions, preparing for the next series of fields and villages where the enemy's best gun will again test the shape of American steel. When the first hit is survived, numbers begin to speak, through logs, orders, and repair returns. That is where the proof awaits. Statistics in war are messy, but behavior tells its own story. And by late 1944, that story is legible in orders, logs, and habits. Field instructions emphasize hull-down gunnery, oblique approaches, and never halting square to threat. After Aricourt, after Aachen, after dozens of nameless village fights between the Siegfried Line and the Rhine, commanders wager on more daylight probes and longer thrusts because tanks live longer under first fire. Survivability becomes command confidence. Confidence becomes movement. Maintenance records tell the same tale from another angle. The proportion of mobility kills recovered and return to service climbs. Shops process twisted track, busted bogies and dented glacis plates instead of whole-burned hulks. Wet stowage shows up indirectly in the data, as fewer catastrophic losses and more repairable damage. Recovery doctrine matures. ARVs and wreckers stage forward. Crews learn to rig a tow in minutes. Every tank brought back is a crew kept together, and a lesson carried forward to the next lane or field. German memoirs and after-action notes contribute a different thread: frustration. Accounts reference rounds that glanced at distances where earlier Shermans had died, and formations that refused to give perpendicular targets. Reports complain of American radios enabling local counter-moves faster than a single gun could exploit its first shot. These testimonies do not deny the lethality of German weapons. They acknowledge the erosion of certainty. The numeric evidence from Aricourt remains contested in detail, as wartime claims always are, but the pattern survives scrutiny. When U.S. units control angle, fog and tempo on the net, German advantages shrink. The converse is also true and appears wherever terrain forces head-on trades at short range. American losses spike. The doctrine that crystallizes is a response to both truths. It insists on manufacturing bad shots for the enemy and good shots for oneself, and on avoiding situations where paper favors become battlefield realities. Production lines magnify the method. Thousands of Shermans do not guarantee victory. They guarantee opportunity if used well. Training turns quantity into quality by teaching every platoon to be a geometry problem the enemy must solve in seconds. Tank destroyers weave into these problems, hunting flanks and refusing to be pulled into frontal pride. Artillery rehearses smoke on call, timing barrages to blind guns for just long enough that a 5-meter slide can convert a lethal equation into a survivable one. Engineers continue to make terrain compliant. Hedgerow keys, corduroy under boggy approaches, bridge bypasses that appear overnight. Each is another way to deny a perpendicular. The system surrounding the tank matters as much as the tank itself. In a force where radios are universal, where artillery answers in minutes, where engineers travel with assault units, angle becomes a service the whole army provides to its armor. Numbers are most persuasive when they are lived. A crew that climbs out of a tank with a gouged glacis puts a hand into the scar and believes in the method for the rest of the war. A battalion that sees its operational tempo rise because more tanks return from first contact plans differently. A corps staff that watches divisions make 20 miles after noon because the lead element survived the morning's first ambush, thinks differently about risk. Morale changes its tone from fear to alertness, the kind that acts instead of freezes. None of this makes armor invulnerable. The 88 remains a fact that training cannot wish away, and terrain will continue to play favorites, but the cumulative effect is visible in the way formations maneuver by early 1945. The enemy's best gun no longer dictates terms by itself. It must find a clean angle at a good range against opponents who will not hold still. That is what proof by behavior looks like. Orders that ask for angle, logs that show survival, and a campaign that begins to move faster because crews have time to learn. The next chapter of the war will generalize these lessons into designs and doctrines that outlive 1945. The steel remembers in museum light. The officers remember in manuals. The crews remember in scars on their hands. The echo of all three is a single habit. Deny certainty, then take it for yourself. The final movement of this film draws that line forward into post-war tanks in the simple, stubborn refrain that holds them together. When behavior and data tell the same story, its echo reaches beyond the battlefield into post-war designs and doctrine. When the war ends, the lesson lives on in steel. Post-war designs lean hard into slope, low silhouettes, stabilized guns, and crew survivability. American Pattons, Soviet T-54s, British Centurions. Designers carry forward the wartime discovery that geometry, not raw thickness alone, protects best for weight carried, and that crews fight longer when the system respects their survival. Stabilizers improve first-round hits at short halts. Radios remain the nervous system that makes angles possible in motion. The vocabulary of 1944 becomes ordinary. Hull down, reverse slope, obliquity, crossfire. The U.S. Army never forgets the interplay. Armor geometry, angles in motion, and nets that choreograph a fight in seconds. It also remembers the humility required to update a mass-produced tank mid-conflict, recutting a glacis, moving ammunition, thickening a turret face, creating an assault variant to take the first punch. None of these were glamorous. All of them paid compound interest in lives and tempo. Post-war doctrine embeds the idea that survivability purchased early becomes freedom of action later. German generals who laughed in 1943 had reasons that made sense in their moment. They had seen square plates and early war habits. They had seen fires that began where stowage sat exposed. They had measured range with clean lines on tables. By 1945, too many rounds had skated, too many jumbos had muscled through murder zones, and too many platoons had turned a physics lecture into living tactics to keep laughing. The point was never that an 88mm gun became harmless. It didn't. The point was that its certainty eroded under slope, obliquity, distance, and teamwork. Museums preserve the evidence without words. Walk a line of late-war Shermans and read the gouges across glacis plates where a shell struck and fled. See spare links welded in crooked ranks like talismans that were really training aids. Look into turret cheeks thick with cast metal and imagine the sound inside when a round arrived heavy and left lighter. Each scar is a time signature for a minute that did not end a crew. The broader military memory files the same truth in more prosaic terms. Manuals specify reverse slope defense. Gunnery tables discuss obliquity and the cost of normal impacts. Field exercises grade hull-down exposure, and the use of smoke as a first resort rather than a last. New vehicles place ammunition below the turret ring, or in blow-off compartments. The route from penetration to fire is made longer everywhere it can be. Survivability is engineered now, not begged for after the fact. There is a cultural echo, too, among armored units. Veterans teach replacements to see terrain as planes, not pictures. Drivers learn that a 2-meter shift can add inches of effective armor. Gunners internalize that a short halt with a bad angle exposed to the enemy is better than a long aim that invites a perfect shot back. Commanders write angle into orders without rhetorical flourish, as if listing fuel or ammunition. The art becomes ordinary and therefore reliable. Strategically, these habits influence how armies plan. Higher survival rates at first contact justify bolder probes, longer thrusts, and tighter clocks. Operational momentum improves not because machines become invincible, but because crews stay to use them. The enemy must invest more time to create the rare clean shot, and in a war of minutes and miles, that time is expensive. The geometry that saved individuals in a hedgerow lane scales to save battalions at a river crossing. What remains at the end is not triumphalism, but a narrow, durable sentence about how the campaign was won more safely than it might have been. Geometry, discipline, and communication can make a good enough machine good enough to win, and sometimes to make even an 88 glance off. The closing image is a tank rolling out of morning mist with a dark scar on its nose and a crew breathing in time with the engine. It angles without thinking, calls once on the net, and moves on. The thesis returns as a refrain because it never stopped being true.